Welcome to Landwards, the podcast for the land-based engineering community, brought to you by the Institution of Agricultural Engineers.
Hello and welcome to Landwards, the podcast of the Institution of Agricultural Engineers. I'm your host, Andy Newbold, and I am joined today by none other than Ray King and Kit Franklin, who are here on behalf of the Robotics Specialist Interest Group of the institution, the Robotics SIG. So, hello, Kit.
Hi, Andy. How are you getting on?
I'm good, thanks. Hi, Ray.
Hi, Andy. How's it going?
It's great, thank you, and thanks very much for joining me. I'm going to sort of hand this is a takeover, Kit, so I better hand over to you.
Yeah, cheers, Andy. So I thought I'd start by sort of saying what the special interest group, the Robotics Special Interest Group, was, and will hopefully continue to be. About 18 months ago, time flies, it might be a bit longer than that, we had a council meeting which discussed possible activity of SIGs and possible new SIGs. Automation and robotics was mentioned, and yeah, it was sort of looked to me as would I be up for setting up something to do a special interest group. And at that point, I thought, well, I didn't quite want to take it all on by myself and try and arrange meetings completely on my own and whatever. So that was where I went to Ray. So Ray studied at Harper with me when I was doing my undergrad degree. But me and Ray have since never worked together, but we are good friends. And happened that Ray was also working in robotics. So it was quite a nice way of us getting back together slightly professionally to try and arrange sort of meetings and online talks. So we've done that over the last couple of years. You can, as members of IAgrE, you can go on to the IAgrE website and you can listen again to all of our online meetings. And yeah, Ray, I guess you say from your point of view what we've done and where we came from.
Yeah. So it's been a really interesting sort of little journey, really, with the special interest group. Had the opportunity to kind of sit in the hot seat and interview all manner of different people and kind of pull different thoughts and ideas together. It's been predominantly panel-based discussions that we've had, but the kind of what's come off the back of the discussion has been really, really interesting, kind of hearing what people have got to say for themselves. So I've really enjoyed it. We haven't actually done one for a little while, so it's good to kind of get together and do something now.
Yeah, well, I think that was kind of partly why we planned this sort of takeover of Andy's podcast, was a little bit to give us an alternative outlet for the SIG, maybe reach a slightly different audience. And who knows, our discussions today might lead to a good topic for our next sort of round table. I guess my one last thing I'll say, Andy, before we move on, I guess, is that obviously the robotics SIG is just one of many SIG groups in the IAgrE. Some are more active than others. And if you're sort of sat at home as a member and you think your area either is underrepresented or not represented at all, I think if you spoke to the Secretariat, they would be really happy to support you setting up your own SIG and trying to push a new area forward, really. So that's a wider ask on the rest of IAgrE, I guess.
It's a shockingly commercial plug there as well, Kit. But that's perfectly acceptable. And just for those of us who are not looking at the IAgrE website at the moment, we do have a definitive list here of some active, some not so active groups around food engineering, soil and water, forestry engineering, health and safety, Internet of Things, pioneering technology, livestock engineering, horticulture, power machinery, renewable energy, and precision agriculture, some of which are liverer than others, to use the correct English terminology. And, you know, again, I would heartily echo Kit and Ray's sentiments that if you want to get stuck in, there are ample opportunities available within our community, within institution. So moving on, nice link there. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It has not escaped our attention that this very week, DEFRA has published the details of the Farming Equipment and Technology Fund 2024, which I am not going to read out the website of, but there are some really interesting robotics, autonomous, technology-driven thingies which have got 50 to 60% funding from the government for you as a farmer, and maybe we should have a look through that list.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to start right now, and we're and ultimately, as someone who goes out and does a lot of talks on when is agricultural automation going to be commercial, when's it going to be on farm, the fact that not only do I now have a good list of companies offering commercial solutions, the fact that some of those solutions are now being, pump primed by government, can only mean that we're on the cusp of an autonomous sort of wave, I guess.
You heard it here first. We're going to hold you to that, Kit.
Well, I've been saying it for the last 10 years.
One of those forward-looking statements, which sooner or later it's going to happen. Just those of us who've spent a bit too much time at the back end of a cow in a milking parlour might also like to point out that autonomous agriculture, and certainly robotic agriculture, has been very, very popular. It's probably starting in the Netherlands and going out from there regarding milking cows for quite some time now. But it's pleasing to see the rest of the industries trying to catch up.
Yeah, it's been I suppose that's been the challenge, hasn't it, with the kind of the robotics piece, like moving away from those sort of fixed machinery, like something that can milk a cow, and moving it to something that can actually move itself around a field. There
are many more parameters with field equipment and field activities than there are with milking a cow. So, I quite agree with that. I mean, shall we just have a look through the list, because I think there are some sort of standouts. Who wants to go first?
I'm just scrolling down through at the moment and in getting to where I'm trying to get to. We've got
yourselves, listeners, on the robot.
I think I could probably hook in with. I think probably one of the big uptakes is probably going to be the inter-row weeders and the inter-row hoeing.
Yeah,
that side of things. I think there's been a big push in terms of there's quite a lot of manufacturers now in that space and a lot of people moving in on that space. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of products for people to choose from, for farmers to choose from. So I think there'll be quite a lot of uptake there. I think it's interesting how the systems are quite sort of limited around sizes and that side of things. But
yeah, well, obviously the guys sat at DEFRA have been out doing a bit of virtual shopping, haven't they, and found some products that fit the bill.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, again, if you go with the camera guided weeding technology as an example, those of us who are close to agronomists in certain situations, particularly with, say, herbicide resistant blackgrass or herbicide resistant ryegrass, to give two examples, where you have got single digit to low double digit percentage controls using traditional agronomy techniques, i.e. AgChem, which as programs are costing into the hundreds of pounds per hectare per season. It's becoming very cost economic, and admittedly, at 10 kilometers an hour at a working width of 6 meters, which is nowhere near the output of a 48-meter self-propelled sprayer. But because the percentage kill is so much greater, i.e. 50%, 60%, 70%, anecdotally, because the effectiveness of the mechanical hoeing is so much greater, growers are quite happily saying, and they're also saying things like, let's grow our cereal rows ever so slightly wider so we can accommodate a winged share for weeding purposes. And they're changing their approaches. So, to me, this is a really timely intervention, assuming you can get your head around the fact that you might have to park the sprayer up or use it in a different way.
Yeah, well, of course, we all know, I say we all know, but, as IAgrE members, we're probably well aware of Tillett and Haig's developments in guided hose and that being brought to market by Garford. And clearly that's now 15 years, 16 years as a product, if not more than that, maybe, I don't know, but the point is that was always high value crops, lettuce, etc. The fact of the matter is now there's a real need to find alternative solutions in your broadacre cereal crops. And so again, it's a market ripe for taking off, isn't it, in a sense?
And if we take the view that innovation often happens because of one of two things: one is money, and the other one is legislation. irrespective of the EU changing the goalposts in terms of their aspiration to reduce AgChem use by 50% and mineral artificial fertilizer similarly, because of what's been happening with our illustrious European colleagues blocking roads with tractors and slurry tankers and telehandlers and ploughing them up recently. Equally, that societal desire to not use those products will not go away. And so, you know, on the one hand, if an ineffective herbicide program for resistant ryegrass or blackgrass is costing hundreds of pounds a hectare, that's a very simple piece of maths to think, what else can I spend that money on to get better control? But equally, when there are less active ingredients available in the spraying department, you know, because of legislation, well, the law says. So we're going to carry on seeing this change and this stimulation for change, aren't we?
So what do the numbers say, Ray? What you've got that one up in front of you? What's the money?
So excuse me. So grant amount for what we've got, interrow weeder 1.8 meters is roughly 24,000. Interrow hoe 3 meter is sort of just over £9,000.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I think it would be interesting. I think you're right there. I think there's an adoption kind of aspect to it as well. I mean, making sure people make the most of the machinery and don't just sort of say, well, I've had a grant, I'll give it a go.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't really like it very much. Okay, I'll go and put it in the hedge, and then it becomes the next thing in the hedge.
There's a delicious kind of sort of circularity about this, because there will be people of a certain age who are quite weathered in appearance, living in the fens, who will have spent far too much time sitting on the back of a steerage hoe behind a Massey 35 or a little David Brown in the 60s and 70s in the fens in the spring, happily manually moving that hoe ever so slightly across an 8 or a 10-foot width between the rows of sugar beet, for instance, or even before that, walking with a hoe, knocking the stuff out. And what this is doing is allowing us to go wider and faster, using a camera to replace the person sitting on the jump seat on the back of the hoe. So we're using technology to replace people, because again, that driver, going back to legislation and money, no one wants to stand and hoe. No one can afford to pay someone to stand and hoe, and we can't afford an ineffective program with AgChem.
And as we say, it's a fairly mature technology, isn't it? It's been around now for a good few years. This is not really a risky move for a farmer to adopt that. In terms of will it function? That, you know, we know it will function. Will it give you the efficacy you need? Well, then, you know, that's going to be situational dependent, I imagine.
The challenge in all this stuff is to do with acceptance of innovation or implementation of it, and that usually occurs between the ears of the person who wants to use the technology or doesn't want to use the technology. And I think that's the challenge with change. Is change management is getting the message out there that this is proven, this works. Yes, you're going to spend this much money, and how you see yourself or how you see yourself doing it. I know we're digressing slightly. Is there anything else which is leaping out on this list?
Let me jump forward to something that's less terrestrial. We've got drone for spraying whitewash onto glass houses. Now, this is an interesting thing. I mean, this is a whole interesting discussion point in itself. We know that spraying from drones is big business in Asia, in less restricted markets. Here, you know, with our CRD chemical regulators and CAA, the aviation guys, we've got various loops to jump through before anybody is going to be commercially using active chemicals with active ingredients from drones. But there's this like unique sort of niche, I guess to me niche, it's probably not niche to the people who work in this world, application where you have to spray the top of glass houses with whitewash to prevent them getting too hot in the summer. That traditionally has been done by people climbing on those roofs with rollers and paint, from what I understand, and knapsacks, which is clearly a risk in itself. So if we go back to the health and safety thing, you know, that's not great. So the idea of doing that from a drone I first came aware of that probably 2 years ago. But again, to see that's not just a sort of demonstration piece for a technology company, that's been done to the point where now they've got it on this list is a step forward for the drone spraying fan club, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say it's drone spraying via a different route. It's doing the same task. It's a completely analogous task, but the active ingredient happens to be a paint rather than a chemical. So yeah, you can. It's like death by 1,000 cuts of the current legislative structure, isn't it? This.
It's finding its way in, isn't it?
Yeah,
I'll tell you something though.
From Auto Spray Systems, actually, when I went to Lama.
It's a fairly beefy piece of kit with a minimum tank capacity of 20 litres.
Yeah. I say, Ray, you're reckoning it'll be the...
Yeah, I spoke to the guys from Auto Spray Systems, which are using the IAgrE drone platform.
Yeah.
I know that they've been making some big kind of big noises about doing in fact, they're looking at their website. Pretty much the first thing that comes up is spraying the top of a greenhouse. So I know they were very buoyant about the future of drone spraying, and I suppose, yeah, it could be, as you say, the thin end of the wedge for getting applying other chemicals into fields. So I think it's potentially. It could be the start of something there. I think it's probably quite a niche application, but I think that's quite often where robotics kind of starts out. And I suppose Kit always goes on about dull, dirty, and dangerous. The previous thing we just talked about was dull, sitting on the back of a hoe and by eye keeping that in line. And this ticks the box of the dangerous because you're not having to put someone up on a glass roof.
I believe Auto Spray Solutions. I think their press releases say, and when I've had quite a lot of contact with them, I spoke with them. I did some stuff in the ring at Cereals with them last year. I think they had the first sort of aerial application license from the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority.
Yeah, it's on their website. They've got it on their website. I'm looking at it now, actually.
That's so it's got nothing to do with the CRD in terms of chemical. Dropping things from a plane from a efficacy or environmental point of view, but it's just the Civil Aviation Authority who've said, in this situation you can do that. I think they're again in terms of that. I mean, just to give some wider knowledge then as well that I think I can share is there are other companies who have managed to get licensing to apply actual active chemicals in the railway environment to use drones to spray embankments in railways. But again, not broadacre agriculture. And again, it was a safety aspect that got that through. It was the aspect that the choice is somebody on the end of a string with a knapsack sprayer dangling down the face of a viaduct or a drone. And that's what got it through.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is, when you look at the IAgrE on Auto Spray Systems website, it is fascinating when you think about the work rates and the capacities it can do with granule application and with liquid application. And I just see the ag application as coming. Yeah. It's on the horizon, isn't it?
But yeah, I mean, again, I can give a bit more I can go in a bit more context again. Like this, what was it? Last June, there was an OECD conference up in York. All about the OECD nations. Are they going to accept spray drones? Are they not going to accept spray drones, etc.? And again, my outcome from that meeting was essentially work in progress. It will come one day, but there's a lot of ducks to get in row before it happens.
Yeah, as you say, all in good time. Shall we move on?
Well, bear in mind you mentioned the back end of cows. Andy, there's a robotic silage pusher. You can have your 2 pence on that, I reckon.
I quite having been culturally attuned to the idea of yard scraping with a little tractor in my youth and pushing up silage with the same little tractor with another little thingamabob with some spinny tires on or something. The idea of a robot silage pusher has a lot of attraction. The reality is, I think for a lot of dairy or livestock farmers, it's something else to go wrong, rather like the electric windows on my first car or central locking, as my dad used to say. And I think if it does the job and it does it quite well, and you're attuned as an owner or a user to understand that, you need to make sure it doesn't get stuck on a piece of fodder beat, and that your yard is flat enough and there are other parameters, I think it'll work perfectly well. But if you forget to charge it, or you've got a very steep slope in your cattle building, and it rains in at one end or something, it's just those limits and understanding them. I think if we talk about the silver bullet idea that this next thing I get is going to revolutionize my business, the reality is it still needs management input.
Yeah, and I think it needs appropriate infrastructure. It's not going to work in your Cumbrian sheds, I imagine, Andy, but
Well, there are some very good Cumbrian sheds. I just haven't got any of them, unfortunately. but yes, you're right. It's infrastructure dependent. I spent a little bit of time with Kuhn looking at their new autonomous forage wagon solution back in the summer. And part of their setup is surveying. They'll come and survey. I don't know if it's even commercially available in the UK, but they've certainly got a number working in Normandy and France now. And they said we need to come and survey your farmyard, basically, to check that the conditions of the farmyard are suitable for the permissible slopes for the unit, the angles it's got to turn round, and so on and so forth. And one of the problems of a lot of farms is that they are still running Grandad's legacy infrastructure, when the 30-cow buyer was the talk of the district, and then they put a 150-cow unit using the 30-cow buyer, and they've now gone to 400 cows a generation later. But there is still housing at one end for 30 cows, which was perfectly acceptable 60 years ago. And that, if we were farming our 400 cows on a greenfield site, we wouldn't start from here, because we'd have paid for all our buildings. And I think that's a wider challenge in ag, full stop, is that because we have multi-generational family businesses for a large chunk of it, outside of, say, the world of Mr. Dyson, we have challenges with that, which is that the latest tech doesn't necessarily have the correct resolution for some of the legacy infrastructure we're still eking our dollars out of. And that's wider than the robot silage pushing.
I think that's quite a good point. To be fair, it's a comment I've heard quite a few times, sort of listening to various things, podcasts, etc., about robotics, the implementation of robotics, and when people are in the early stages developing their robot, they turn up and sort of try to solve some of their problems early on by saying to the farmers, can we just put some, could we put a rail system in, or could we put a track in, or could we do this?
Yeah.
It makes our job easier. And I think it's more a case of you need to be, if you're in that position, you need to be looking at the challenges that solving problems for the farmers, not just kind of adding in new infrastructure, or basically saying your infrastructure doesn't quite work. And I know it's one of those things that Ian Beecher-Jones of the
I know Ian.
Digital Vineyard. I know he's very keen, and I agree with him. Very keen that if someone turns up with one of their robots in his vineyard, they need to be able to within 5 minutes be up and operational, not spend 3 days doing a survey,
mapping the boundaries.
The boundaries. And I know, and he's actually doing something about that as well. I know he's working on a project to kind of create sort of basically digital sort of architecture, or kind of effectively digitize the vineyard. So basically that is saved forever and everyone can use it. And it's an interesting one, because it's sort of, it kind of spans that sort of slightly open source area as well, because you kind of have to have it open so that everyone can use it. Otherwise everyone has to come and do their own map, and you're back at the same point of, it's going to take us 5 days to come and set up, because we need to map your assets, or your infrastructure. So I think that has been a challenge, but I think it's it needs to be, the robots either need to be in, or technology needs to be clever enough that it can maneuver its way around whatever environment we put it in.
There's a whole conversation, isn't there, about, and in robotic terms. So if we wind the clock back, I'm going to say 15, 20 years in my case, with ISOBUS, the big debate was around what they used to talk about was things like plug fests. So it was all about plug and play, and whether, Isobus fertilizer spreader worked with the from manufacturer A, worked with the Isobus on tractor manufacturer B's tractor. And you take that analogy on further into being field ready, which is that you arrive with your horse box full of autonomous field robots, swing the tailgate down and let them scamper off through the gate to start doing their jobs. And you want them to actually be up and running, don't you?
I'm going to counter this a little bit. I mean, going back to my background with hands-free and talking about automating, arable fields eventually at some point with tractors, I was never opposed to that much to the idea of having to map some boundaries. If you have to map your boundaries once and generate route plans once,
I think that's reasonable.
You're investing in a machine that you're going to use 5 times in the field every year for the next 5 years. Mapping your boundaries once is a pretty minimal request. I guess. But I guess if it's the service model that you're talking about, someone needs to turn up and operate, then that needs to be a lot more fluid than that. So I guess that gets us into a whole other debate, which is the ownership versus sort of service model, business model, isn't it?
No,
that's a different topic.
There's some hobby horses around that one.
Yeah, don't get us started.
I think just to finish off this DEFRA plug then, Andy, there's also camera guided inter-row spraying to add to your hoeing as a separate category. Similar sorts of numbers involved, but separate category. And then finally there is, I think probably the peak one that really uses the word robotic is the robotic drilling guided hoe. £62,000 is expected to be spent, of which the government will give you £37,000. So I think all us three on this call can picture exactly the machine they have in mind for that. So
there is just as a slight aside, because I'm quite excited and scared in equal measures about this piece of technology. There is FETF 422 tractor-powered electric desiccator for weed and plant control. Which is quite exciting because it means you can zip down a field and zap your weeds. But equally, on a damp day, you wouldn't want to be standing too close to it, even with your wellies on, would you?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't like to be involved with the risk assessment and CE marking of that, Andy.
Yeah, well, it says to be able to work in windy and wet weather conditions (brackets Cumbria), having a working speed of at least 2 kilometers an hour. Uses a high voltage system to desiccate the selected growing plants. And I really, I know there's stuff out there. I know the technology which Case bought from I have a partnership with. Is it Zasso? There's an Italian tractor. Where you put a blooming great tractor mounted 3-phase generator on the back of it. In several 100 kilowatt tractor to run a several 100 kilowatt generator. But I'd really like to see that in action and see some proven stuff. There's a challenge out.
Ray, you've got some history with that, haven't you, Ray? I think.
Yeah. So
small robot.
It's small robot. One of the projects we looked at was looking at working with a company called Rootwave, who developed a similar piece of technology. But specifically looking at a per plant or a per weed treatment. So you basically you kind of reduce that power requirement because you're only treating because effectively what you're doing is boiling water. It takes an enormous amount of energy.
But on a per plant basis, it doesn't take a lot of energy, does it? Because you're identifying and burning that one plant.
Exactly, yeah. But the challenge we came up against then was treatment speed.
Yes.
I think it's interesting and it's interesting to see, but I think it kind of you end up. It's where do you draw the line and what do you swap? You've got an enormous amount of extra diesel burn to go out in the field, so you're putting plenty more. And
I'm trying to get to net zero with my farming activities with my annual carbon auditing. And actually, yes, you've replaced a product, i.e. IAgrE and a certain technology, with another technology which is potentially very slow and, as you say, very energy intensive.
So that
doesn't use active ingredients.
That probably takes us back to the old the robotic drilling guided hoe, and the machine that seems to fit the bill is the farm droid, of course, with the solar powered, lives in the field, slow work rate. You've got to get your head around it. As a farmer, you need to get your head around the fact that you're not going to turn up to a field and do a job in 3 hours and leave. You're going to put a machine in the field and it might take 3 days to do the job, but then it doesn't have someone sat on it. It doesn't drink diesel, and it can live in the field for the duration of that crop growth. And I think it's a real paradigm shift in the way that we farm and get our heads around field management. That I say, it's not short, sharp interventions. It lives in the field, and I think it's
gently works its way through almost pastorally. The other thing worth mentioning regarding that particular product is it has to map the field and it has to plant the seed, because it's got its own RTK system which knows exactly where every seed is, and consequently it can actually see, depending on the seed spacing, it doesn't have to, it can be row independent in its weeding.
Well, and it can be pre-emergence is the really fun thing, because it logs every single seed. It can pre-emergence weed, which I find exceptionally exciting, because I've been doing this
to get out more.
Because I need to get out more. But I've been talking about agricultural robotics since my master's, or which is now 12 years ago or something like that. And one of the things I wrote in an essay was, if you could map every seed, you could weed pre-emergence. And I wrote it in an essay, which I still have. And here we are 12 years later or whatever it is, and there's a machine that does it, and that's pretty cool.
And you will be instructing your solicitors to have a chat with about your pre-existing IP there, presumably.
As with everything I've ever done, Andy, I have zero copyright or patents or anything to defend any of my ideas.
We'll talk about that later, Kate. We'll take that one offline. Gentlemen, shall we move on to, and this is the somber moment now, hats off, dress in black, the small robot company, Ray.
Yes.
The recent demise of the small robot company.
Yes. So where do I start? Where do I finish, I suppose? So it's been I'll start with my story at Small Robot Company. I think that will probably lead on quite nicely. So I started there 4.5 years ago, something like that. I arrived when the robot that everyone talked about, the Tom robot, was about not much bigger than a shoebox, and was a remote control car, effectively, with some additional kind of hardware on it, GPS, etc. And it was very much a sort of a proof of concept device. I arrived and along with a few others, to kind of bolster the technical side and basically take the kind of help them carry forwards the per plant farming approach, which is scout every seed with your Tom robot, treat every seed with your Dick robot, and then you plant your seeds with the Harry robot. That was the dream. So 3 robots, Tom, Dick, and Harry. And the first stage of that was working on the Tom robot. So we worked our way through effectively three iterations of that robot. So we scaled up. So it's about the size. By the time we finished, the robots were sort of about the same size as a quad bike, and they were a scanning robot that had a 6-meter boom on it, and 8 cameras, which basically gathered very high resolution imagery, and then we were able to analyze that, and it would give you basically an incredibly detailed map of the field. You could run that through various machine learning models, and that would tell you where all your weeds are. And we even reached the dizzying heights of being able to locate blackgrass plants in a grass type crop, so a wheat or a barley. And yeah, I mean, it's been a massive learning curve for me, understanding kind of how companies like Small Robot Company kind of come into existence, and the founders put enormous amounts of effort and time and blood, sweat, and tears to kind of getting it off the ground and keeping it going, and kind of seeing how it kind of picked up off the back of various rounds of crowdfunding that we did, and you know, kind of we really got a lot of support from, you know, an enormous number of people that put money in to kind of keep it, to kind of take the dream to the next stage, basically. And it's been incredibly sad to see it kind of basically going through administration is where we ended up.
Yeah.
And I think we got the financial climate changed a lot very quickly, and so when we had COVID was actually a bit of a boom time for all things robotics and autonomy. There was a lot of money being thrown around. You know, everyone could see that people didn't need to be. We shouldn't have people involved in certain activities, or we couldn't have people involved in certain activities. So autonomy made total sense. So if you were involved in that area, we were sort of front and center of that in the UK. And I think that really helped us out. There was various bits of funding as well from the government that I think we were able to sort of take advantage of, and we're involved in a lot of Innovate UK projects, which were very interesting, and kind of quite useful to help us kind of structure out the kind of the product roadmap. But I think, yeah, as soon as things sort of settled down after COVID in terms of people being able to go out, there was a lot of money in the system, and that seems to have caused a lot of caused all this inflation, which is just killed off the kind of the investment side of things, and people are really looking at, you know, where's the best place to put my money. And when you've got interest rates of, you know, whatever we're at the moment, you know, climbed up to sort of 4 or 5%, whatever. You know, looking at
the landscape has changed massively in the last few years.
And
you know, there was a lot of cheap money roaring around looking for a home.
Exactly.
You know, and without going into the whys and wherefores, it's you know, it's completely valid to say that the landscape small robot company we're operating in changed radically, and that was outside of your control, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly. So, and I think that's sort of ultimately what kind of caught it, really. We had a plan. You know, we knew where we were going. We had a good kind of plan forward for the products, and we were kind of set to do that. We went through various sort of rounds of getting quite close with you know, VC money, and they just nothing quite came off. And I think it's basically because all the
and a lot of good IP came out of it. You know, you took forward the field, irrespective of the commercial aspects, that you took forward the field of what you could achieve in an autonomous farming situation.
Oh yeah, yes, exactly. And I think what I would say is I don't think you've seen the last of any of the concepts or any of the technology. I think it will. No. You know, there will be a lot of people interested in what's going to come off the back of, you know, the assets still exist, and the amazing team. Everyone's still out there. I mean, you know, most people have found jobs now because they're very employable with the skill sets that they've got. But you know, the learning and the experience is all out there. So I think it's only done good things for certainly for robotics and for farming. But I think, yeah, it's just it was a big shame, and it was an amazing place to work, and a really fun place to work. You know, everyone was really sort of pushing in the same direction. So it's sad to see it go, but I don't think it's the last we'll see of any of the technology or any of the concepts that were being pushed.
No, I think you're right. Shall we? This is classic presenter. And finally, shall we move on to talk about? I'm going to just use a set of terminology here, which you will describe to me, Ray, because it was actually your idea. I'll read the headline out, and then you get to explain it. Agtonomy integrates smart agriculture equipment to deliver first autonomous task ecosystem. I think you could rearrange several of those words and probably say the same thing, but over to you, Ray. This was your thing. Bowl it away.
quite the mouthful, isn't it? And where do we start with this? I mean, so it's a bit of a classic for one of those very interesting. I kind of caught my eye. My background is mechanical engineering, and when I saw an article with a really exciting picture of some very complicated machinery, that really piqued my interest. But I think I like the ecosystem concept that they're putting forward, and kind of having machinery talking to other machines, and also talking to kind of centralized controls and that sort of thing. I think the thing that I really honed in on was the Agtonomy's smart toolbar, which, from what I can understand, and this is perhaps where it's maybe the message, as you say, maybe there's a lot of words in there and the message isn't quite getting through, but the smart toolbar, a generic sensor-enabled intelligent toolbar. I like the concept of being able to add intelligence and add autonomy to existing machinery, and I think, and I also like the idea of their what they term their smart takeoff, which is a play on the power takeoff, and having that kind of interoperability and interconnectivity of machinery. So I think that opens up a lot of
essentially they're reimagining the back end of the tractor, aren't they, is what they're talking about, but for the modern era. And they were smart enough to not only come up with the term smart takeoff, STO, rather than PTO, but actually trademark it as well. So we can't help but say Agtonomy are responsible for the term STO, which is clever.
Exactly.
I mean, it's quite interesting. At the bottom of their website, it says about Agtonomy, and amongst all the other glorious things it tells us, it says Agtonomy embeds their smarts into brand name tractors and implements, digitally transforming machinery into a remote operated, task driven ecosystem for safe, equitable, profitable and climate smart agriculture. And the embeds their smarts into brand name tractors and implements leads me on to my chosen corner of grumpy middle-aged man by saying, but that isn't this just another take on the advanced automation and autonomy 3A concept, which Class, AgSeed and Amazon have been working on concurrently, where they've effectively got a cross manufacturer, cross platform project, which in their words is there to revolutionize agriculture. It's of the moment, isn't it?
I think you're 100% right, Andy. And as we in our little preamble, I think this is a VHS Betamax scenario. Mini disc CD scenario, etc., where there's going to be lots of competing. How do we plug and play things? How do we mesh this together? What ends up coming out as a optimum output, I'm never sure. And I'm going to sound grumpy and middle-aged now as well, but I'm going to say, I don't think we'll be getting rid of the 3-point linkage anytime soon in category 1. I think if we're going small tractors, small implements, or small robot platforms, which I like to call tractors, I imagine we're going to still see the 3-point linkage going on, but certainly, and then obviously we've already got the isobus plug, etc. I hate to sound as marketing as the Agtonomy website, but it's going to be a bit of a wild west out there, isn't it, with all these different competing things?
I'd agree.
I think so, and I think I completely agree with you on the 3-point linkage. I think there's a reason it hasn't really changed in the last when was it invented?
1924, I think, the first patent, if I remember my patent list.
Well, there you go. I mean,
Andy's gone off to check. I love this.
I've just had to look out the office window. That's all. It's a separate matter which I will not bore the podcast with at this point.
I thought you'd gone off to check your timeline you had on the wall, or
Yeah, no, and just for the record, 1924 is only 100 years ago for those of us who are nearly old enough to remember it.
but
That's all I'm going to say.
That's a long time for a piece of technology to remain largely unchanged. Obviously, some smarts, etc., have been added to it over the years, and I'm sure people have tried to reinvent the wheel with it a few times. But I massively agree. I also think there's an adoption piece that has to sit, and it has to sit right with farmers, and that's kind of why I liked the thought around the sort of the generic toolbar piece. Like, if there's a way in which you can use an existing piece of machinery but in a more clever or more efficiently, then that makes a lot of sense, I think, because it allows you to kind of step change your way towards autonomy and robotics, or to a more efficient, less labor intensive system. So I think that's the way that adoption is probably going to happen. And this is coming from someone that's just told you, we came up with these robots, and they were very niche, and they were very specific to tasks. And we had a modular architecture, as we like to call it, but it wasn't as easy to change things around as a 3-point linkage. And I think any platform that comes forth, I think it needs to have that remaining capability, because not all implements need to be smart either. So you may have a smart something that has smarts on the tractor side, but not on the implement side.
I think each time that technology changes, I'm talking very specifically about this interfacing of a tractor unit and an implement unit, and that tractor might have someone sat on it, it might not have someone sat on it, etc. But every time we change the technology, the complexity of that interface moves by an order of magnitude. So if you take when it was purely mechanical, we had a 3-point linkage, fairly great idea, very clever, but quite simple. Everybody can make things that interoperated, not an issue. Then you pick up on what Andy said earlier. We tried to go to isobus and standardize the signals, and suddenly we had to have plug fests, because it wasn't as straightforward as when it was just mechanical and you just need to make something to the right measurements. Suddenly there was pixies that didn't want to talk to each other traveling down wires. So as we go forward, as the technology gets more advanced, that the order of magnitude of that interface, the complexity of that interface is clearly going to increase. But that doesn't mean we should turn our back on some of the tried, tested technologies, I'd say.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And I think there's one of the few benefits of age is the ability to look back on a timeline, because we're all time space dependent in wherever we sit. And there's always a great deal of excitement about what's new. And I think, in my world with publishing, with innovation, I'm forever what's new, what's fresh. And you realize that actually there isn't a lot of step changing out there. There's just gradual evolution, and that's nature's way. And it's usually the way with ideas, and we go looking outside of agriculture for ideas. We look outside of our existing world for learning, and that's how things go forwards. I feel, given that we've given a good old run at this, I think we could probably go for several more hours. But is there anything anyone wants to say finally, or shall we wrap matters up, gentlemen?
I'm just going to pick up on the point you just said there, Andy. I think, and I don't. Again, I sort of didn't really want to comment too much on the small robot thing, but almost to me, the small robot model was to be very revolutionary, whereas the stuff that's finding its way onto farm is much more evolutionary. And I think that's an interesting point you just made, and fits the bill around the things we've talked about today. Around the demise of small robot, but then the sort of the fact that we've got autonomous weeding being funded by government. It's an evolution that's coming through, not a revolution.
Yeah, and I think that's government and government funding is generally a bit of a lagging indicator, because they're not going to put money where they don't think it's going to deliver value, because the point is it's pump priming activity. Nudging, I think, is the political influence terminology, but it is that. Ray, anything else from you?
No, I don't think so as such. I think, probably agree with Kit. I think And I think probably to kind of put a finer point on it, it's, you know, you could probably say small robot company was probably 5 or 10 years too early. From that, in that respect, things will catch up, or certainly some significant aspects of agriculture and agricultural machinery will catch up to that point. But it's going to take some time to get there. So I think, I kind of agree with that. I think I agree with the evolutionary things tend to evolve, and it's because of adoption and how people take things on, and how people need, how they need to make their farm machinery ecosystem work for them. So I agree with that.
No, well, that's great. Well, look, Ray King, Kit Franklin, on behalf of the Institution of Agricultural Engineers Robotics Specialist Interest Group, thank you for the takeover today. I feel you've been very kind with me, and genuinely, it's been good fun and it's been really interesting. So thank you very much, gentlemen.
Well, thank you, Andy, for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks. It's been really interesting. I like chats like this where we get to talk about concepts, new ideas and stuff. I'm
going to suggest we do this again at some point in the future, but let's not fix a date live. You have been listening to the Robotics Specialist Interest Group takeover of the Landwards podcast. I am your host, Andy Newbold, signing off. Thank you very much for your time and attention today. We hope you've had fun and have had a very small bit of intellectual stimulation, but some interesting food for thought there. Thank you very much.
For more information, visit www. You have been listening to Landwards, the podcast for the land-based engineering community, brought to you by the Institution of Agricultural Engineers.